Was the worst year for a lot of us for our mental as well as physical health. So joining us this morning is best-selling author, coach, and fitness expert, Lisa Goldenthal.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa G, your host. You're at the top of your game, yet the game is changing faster than ever. Strategies that got you here aren't the ones that'll keep you here. The pressure is relentless, and the fear of obsolescence looms large. That's why I'm here. Welcome to the new podcast series, Disrupted: How to Be Gritty and Unlock Performance. This is your chance where I sit down with today's tops in business, mindset, wellness, and success to help you master disruption and thrive.
Thanks for coming, and I'll see you soon.
He's the founder and CEO of Rewire, a leading coaching and development company with over 30,000 hours of one-on-one coaching experience. He's dedicated to empowering businesses and individuals for radical improvement with a background in neurobiology. His expertise is widely recognized. He's a co-host of the Insight Interviews podcast, author of 2 books. He does workshops, keynotes across the country. His passion for transformative change inspires countless organizations. Welcome to the podcast, Steve Scanlon.
Great to be here, Lisa. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I forgot.
You got it.
Oh,
You got
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about the work that you do. It's so helpful. Especially, can we just jump in with Mental Health Month going on now?
Yeah.
Is it possible to teach people to be less stressed in this stressful world we're living in?
Wow, that is the deep end of the pool.
I jumped right into that.
How that's a great question. First of
Thank
all,
you.
how deep do you and your listeners want to go into that question?
Well, I feel like stress is the big elephant in the room, so we might as well address it head on.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. Let's address it head on. I'm trying to think of how I can synthesize this into a few minutes that's helpful, because we don't go very long here. Stress and anxiety, worry, fear, and fret are all possible emotions that we have in this modern world. I will tell you one thing about them is, primarily speaking, stress is a future projection of a negative outcome.
Right.
If we projected into the future something that was going to happen positively, stress wouldn't be the byproduct. From a neurobiologic perspective, when we experience stress, whether it's eustress or distress, whenever we experience stress, and again, I'm going to use the word stress because you did, but anxiety, worry, fear, those probably, Lisa, have some clinical differences, but for the sake of our argument, let's just put it under the bucket of stress. When we experience stress, our brain, technically our pituitary glands, release a neurochemical that many people listening to your show will have heard of, called cortisol.
Oh, yeah. Cortisol and I are familiar with each other.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So cortisol was designed in the brain for a very particular purpose. It was primarily designed, if you want to think of it design, some people think of that spiritually, other people think of it evolutionarily, it doesn't matter. The design of cortisol is, Lisa, to get you out of a life-threatening situation.
Right.
So if you're running across the street and you're about to get hit by a car, I hope to God you have some cortisol and adrenaline, because you need to get out of that situation or you actually will die. The challenge in our modern day world is that so many people, for such a long period of time, we take some things like, what's going to happen with our kids? What about our work? What should I do about this? And there are many situations that come, what about the economy? Who are we going to vote for? Name it, right?
There's a lot of it going around: volatility, uncertainty, et cetera.
None of it that I just mentioned is actually life-threatening.
Right.
So the real trick is to identify what is actually life-threatening and what is not. But for somebody, many people, they've been stressing since they were in second grade.
Right.
And so, we go and we have a quiz or a test and we go through school and college. Actually, our culture strangely promotes stress.
Yeah.
And many of the people that I work with one-on-one, when they experience stress and whatever, to them, it feels very natural, right? They want to tell me about some external circumstance. Oh my gosh, don't you see what's going on with the environment, as an example? And
Right.
they get stressed about that. They experience a cortisol increase. But if the environment, in the way that we think about it daily, is not necessarily an immediate, imminent threat to your life. Now, one could argue over time, I guess you could get into that argument. But the thing about it is, when we were little, we learned that if we stress, we act. If I stress out about a test, it causes action. Then I go study. And so we taught ourselves that stress is the great impetus of action.
Interesting.
But here's the problem. Most people understand, and I go into this with people. You picked on a topic that I studied. I actually spent the better part of a decade studying the neurochemical and the hormone cortisol. So stress, can you educate people to be less stressed? Yes, in part of that is educating people on the neurobiology of what's actually going on in your mind. However, you can't be doing something for 40 years of your life and all of a sudden expect to hear one lesson and go, oh, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Correct.
Stress is a neurochemical. And much like other neurochemicals like dopamine or serotonin or other neurochemicals that we have, once we establish those things, I'm going to say something to your listeners that might freak people out. Stress, for so many people, believe it or not, is an addiction.
I believe it. I've seen,
because we don't even know how to, we don't know how to operate without it.
right.
So in my line of work, helping people understand that when you're under stress, interestingly, there are whole parts of your brain that are impacted negatively. Right. Now, I could go in and I could probably educate you, and you don't even need this education, Lisa, but I'll tell your listeners.
I do. I want to hear.
But I don't think people need to be educated about this, but I will tell you, by the way, Google this. Don't just believe me, because this is readily available information. Go Google excessive cortisol and weight gain.
Oh, yeah, like around the belly and stuff like that.
Go Google excessive cortisol and type 2 diabetes. Go Google excessive cortisol and cardiovascular disease. Go Google excessive cortisol and early onset dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's one after another, which is why, by the way, when you go to the doctor, you could stub your toe and go to the doctor. And one of the questions on the thing is, how stressed are you? Because the medical community for years, maybe decades, maybe, I don't know, we've understood that stress has an overarching negative impact on our long-term health, probably our medium-run health. We know this.
Yes.
And yet, as a culture, you're bringing it up first thing because we're not mitigating it. We're still really stressed out. So you picked up on something that I do a lot in my work, is educate people on the effects of cortisol and then teach some processes about learning to be present, not projecting in the future, metacognition, and some other processes that we work on, so that it's not just, because if I don't help people actually in a practice, well, then all I'm telling people is, hey, do you know stress is bad for you? And you knew that before you talked to me.
Well, this is such a great topic. I'm glad I jumped right into the fire with stress, because I feel it. I see a lot of people operating at that level. I feel like collectively we've been through trauma in the last 4 years, and people have gone back, I'd say 10 decades, in their fight and flight, amygdala hijack. So why don't we jump into your theories on the lizard brain and metacognition, because it all ties in together, doesn't it, with your work?
Yeah. Yeah. And the work that we do is fairly comprehensive. So a quick little podcast like this makes it feel like, we got to jam it all in.
No, you don't have to. Just give us like some good tips.
Yeah. Well, the lizard brain, many people have heard about the lizard brain. The lizard brain is this part of our brain that effectively protects our survival.
Right.
And so in order to survive, the brain does four primary things. It looks for familiarity. It looks to be right. It looks to make habits, and it looks to control. Those are the four characteristics of the lizard brain. And I published a book called Still the Lizard on how to, some ways to effectively quiet this part of your brain. You could be a TED Talk watcher and go listen to Seth Godin. He's got a TED Talk and he calls it Quiet the Lizard Brain. I use the language of learning to still the lizard brain because that's the name of my book is Still the Lizard. So maybe it's a little bit of promotion. So yeah, probably again, if I was going to give you some quick tips, the number one way to keep your lizard brain still, which by the way, the number one way to reduce cortisol, if you really want to know, number one, there is one, the
I
number
want
one
to
way.
hear it. What do you got?
What do you guess? Let me get your best
what works
guess.
for me, I was interested in this topic for selfish reasons. Of course, I feel like stress is one of my superpowers. I do feel like I have high levels of anxiety, which is why most of my life I've spent exercising in one way or another as a career, because exercise, movement, meditation, getting out in nature are all things that calms me down and helps me think more with my reasoning brain from my heart rather than just always from that fight or flight, like a bear's going to kill me kind of mentality.
Oh, there you go. Well, what would you say if I told you your subjective experience? Well, what works for me? I appreciated you saying that. What if I told you that what works for you is absolutely supported in research,
I believe it.
right?
I
And
can
so,
feel firsthand that it works.
right. So you don't need the research. Even if I said, no, that's not what the research says, you'd be like, well, I don't care if it helps you. But as it turns out, there is just an astounding amount of work on take one of those things, exercise, right? Dr. John Arden, who is a pretty famous neuroscientist in the Sacramento area, I've got this little video of him saying, if you want to reduce stress and you want an instant hit of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and he lists out all these positive neurochemicals, he goes, an instant hit, go for a brisk walk. He's like, we don't have medication yet that can hit the brain as well as something like a brisk walk.
Wow. True, right? For me, it is like,
Well, no, that you just mentioned that's neurobiology. And
yeah.
yet we are a nation of sitters, right? I noticed in your background, you have this huge physical health thing, right? You taught in that, you do a bunch of stuff and
Yeah, that was my first love, but it took me till I got older and realized how anxious I really am, that it was just a natural gravitation towards exercise. And it's brought me into coaching because I'm just as passionate about helping others to manage stress, although I come at it from a different background than you, and leadership too. So it all ties in together, because how you lead yourself is how you lead other people, in my opinion. So self-leadership matters.
maybe more than anything.
Yeah,
We might
walk
be
the walk.
we might be less on the other side of the fence with that than you think. So yeah, all these practices of stress and anxiety and metacognition and the lizard brain and stuff, I tell people if I didn't have to earn a living doing what I do, I would mostly just be a practitioner of my own work.
Wow. So
Right.
what else besides the exercise is the meditation?
Well, again, I wanted you to have the first say because it works for you. And by the way, if you said something kind of off the reservation, I might say there's no research to support that. But as it turns out, you also mentioned meditation, right? For anybody listening that, some people think, oh, that's just goofy. That's this, that's this. Well, the research that exists today about even 10 minutes of meditation a day. I mean, there is a book that Dr. Richie Davidson and Daniel Goleman, who was the pioneer of the field of emotional intelligence. Well, Richie Davidson and Daniel Goleman in 2016 published a book called Altered Traits, because the research was suggesting that when you meditate even 10 minutes a day, it actually changes your epigenetics, right?
Yeah.
This isn't some cutesy little, we're all going to wear a robe and hum on the ground. This is life altering work. And so I always tell my groups, If you knew what I knew about meditation, you wouldn't miss a day for the rest of your natural born life.
Yeah, I learned that from Dr. Joe Dispenza during the
Yeah,
pandemic. I would
Dispenza's,
listen to him do his meditations, and it really changed the way I would get out of bed in the morning and with a different attitude. And for the people that don't know what metacognition is, do you want to cover that with
yeah,
that rest of
yeah.
your lizard brain?
Yeah, I know we
too?
have only a few
No,
minutes.
keep
I
going.
will, I'm going to get you the number one thing. We haven't talked about that yet.
What's the number one thing?
I feel like there should be a drum roll. Can you get your editors and to do a drum roll for it?
Absolutely.
It's not going to be particularly, grand revelation that people haven't heard of. In fact, it might make people kind of go wah wah wah. You ready? Number one way to reduce cortisol, the biology. Ready?
I'm ready. What do you
Sleep.
got?
Sleep.
Oh, okay.
See? Sleep. When we get slow wave, theta wave sleep, our brain actually opens this system. Again, people can go and research this if they want, called the glymphatic system, which is our glial cells and lymph nodes that operate together. And through that system, basically, the brain eradicates dead cells, neurotoxins, and cortisol. So, by the way, most of the research around exercise is wonderful because it increases positive neurochemistry. However, when we get on a regimen of regular exercise, primarily what it's doing is helping us get better sleep.
Oh, that's another good reason to do all of the things.
That's right. That's right. Now, we still have to deal with, and if you're coaching people will come in and they give you this whole, I don't have time for exercise, which, by the way, is for most people not even true. Right. That's what we do.
The same 24 hours in the day. It's about managing them.
That's exactly right. So if we can get people exercising and meditating, but primarily if I was offering my one tip, it would be take sleep hygiene seriously.
Yeah. Those are
But
wonderful.
we don't live in a culture that gets very good sleep.
Yeah, it's like
right? And then it's
to not.
Well, it's a catch-22, right? I'm stressed out. I don't sleep because I'm stressed. And because we're stressed out and anxious, then we're not getting good sleep. Then, by the way, when we don't get sleep, we wake up and have a bunch of caffeine because we didn't sleep very well, which, by the way, an increase in caffeine actually begins to inhibit our ability to get good rest. And the wheel on the bus goes round and round.
Yeah.
And so take sleep hygiene. I call it that because you can't put a gun. You can't coach someone. So I want you to get better sleep tonight. Like, okay, well, what you can do is pay attention to your habits in and around how you go to sleep. And we're all going to learn this more and more as time goes on. Sleep is the number one way to reduce stress.
Okay, well, I guess the last question that I have for you in this short podcast is really about metacognition, because we dropped that name around and I don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
I know what it is, but I'm just wondering, because of my work that I've done with the Mental Wellness Society and the passionate about it, I want to know for the audience what it is.
Yeah. So metacognition is literally, by the word itself, meta is a Greek prefix that I always think of the word about. Cognition is just a fancy word for thinking. So
Right.
metacognition is thinking about how you're thinking. It's the thinking about your thinking, right? So if I'm driving and somebody does something dumb and I get mad, like, why did that person do that? I can, in that moment, recognize my own anger and I can have an inner dialogue and I can say, Steve, wow, interesting, anger. And I can separate who I am as a person from the emotion that I feel. And when I'm doing that, I am practicing metacognition. I'll only tell you one little thing about metacognition. If you've ever heard, Lisa, someone say to you or anybody else, if you've heard the saying, I'm in my own head. Man, I really feel like I'm in my own head.
I felt that way. I understand.
Yeah, but let me ask you, when you're in your own head and you say that language, right? We use that little euphemism. Is that generally, Lisa, a positive thing or a negative thing?
Oh, that's for sure negative, in my opinion, because
exactly
you're thinking about the problem instead of the solution oftentimes, like problem focus, problem focus.
So metacognition is the positive way to be in your own head.
Wonderful.
You're not spinning, you're not debating, you're not recycling a problem only. You're actually separating yourself to be able to go, wow, Lisa, look at me think about that. Look at me do that. And it doesn't always have to be negative. You can practice metacognition. Wow, look at me feel joy around this. And so the practice of metacognition is getting better at understanding and the willingness to non-judgmentally explore how you think. But again, for a lot of people, that's one of my favorite bumper stickers. It says, don't believe everything you think.
That's brilliant. I think that is EQ in action, baby, because it's, not everybody, when they're triggered and something happens they don't like, knows how to think about what they're thinking before they react.
Yeah. And so the practice of metacognition is teaching all of us when we get triggered, rather than just to go emotionally and then in our actions down the road of whatever the trigger was doing, that we pause even for a few seconds and recognize like, whoa, look at me think that. Interesting. Not look at me think that, don't do that. Look at me think that, yeah, I'm right. You don't judge. You're trying to go, you're just exploring and examining thoughts and feelings and different mental experiences that you have. It's not that complex, but as it turns out, for many people who've never done it, doing it is a little odd, because a lot of people, that's why the bumper sticker is so funny, right? Most people, if they think a thought, they just believe it. There's very little difference between belief and truth and thoughts they think. And so, if I'm driving down and that person's an idiot, well, then if I don't practice metacognition, that just becomes a truth. And that may or may not be true. Maybe they're in a hurry. Maybe something happened to them. I don't know what the truth is, but however I react, I can still explore that. And that's what metacognition is.
Well, thanks for that very succinct definition. And I know we've explored some topics that sound simple, but they're not easy when you have all these years and years of programming dictating your behaviors. If you don't get introspective with that self-awareness that you just showed that you have about, why am I thinking this? So where can people connect with you, find more of Steve Scanlon?
Yeah, so we're an executive coaching company. We do a lot of speaking and training. We do a lot of leadership training like you do. I think we have 17 or 18 coaches around the country. The name of my company is Rewire. And so we can be found at Rewire Inc., REWIREINC. And so I've tried to have Rewire. Last time I looked, that was owned by an electrical company in New Jersey.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, it's such a wonderful name. Rewire Inc. is wonderful. And I know you're also on LinkedIn. So we'll have people reach out to you on Rewire Inc.
Yeah. Or, at Rewire Inc. or on LinkedIn. I don't do Facebook. Is that okay? Sorry, I got off that about 7 years ago.
Who has time for all that stuff? Well, thanks again for being a wonderful guest, Steve.
Lisa, thank you. Thank you for all you do, and I wish you well.
Thanks.